Among the golden hills of Kentucky, where the aroma of freshly ground coffee mingled with the crisp mountain air, the town of Golden Creek harbored secrets that no one could imagine. Mrs. Hope Montgomery rocked slowly on the porch of her modest farmhouse, gazing at the horizon with eyes that had seen more than anyone could guess. At 70 years old, her wrinkled hands and simple clothes concealed one of the most brilliant minds in the agricultural business across all of America. "Mrs. Montgomery, good morning," called Jack, the young helper, as he carried baskets of freshly harvested coffee. "The delivery for the Louisville market is ready." Hope nodded with a slight smile. No one in town, not even Jack, who had worked for her since he was a boy, knew that those baskets represented merely a fraction of her true empire. The farm, Whisper Creek, as everyone knew it, looked like just another property in the Kentucky landscape, modest, traditional, with free-ranging chickens and an herb garden. But in offices in New York City, Berlin, and Tokyo, the name Hope Montgomery appeared on documents worth millions. That same day, Caroline Baker was returning to Golden Creek after 20 years away, a retired journalist from an important national newspaper. She was coming back to her hometown after the death of her husband, Frank. The taxi dropped her off in front of her old family home, now covered with vines and memories. "Caroline, is that you, girl?" asked a warm voice. It was Dorothy Sanders, her lifelong neighbor, with her immaculate apron and familiar hairstyle. "Dottie, it's been so long," exclaimed Caroline, embracing the woman who smelled of cinnamon and years of friendship. "Come in and have some coffee. You won't believe how much this town has changed." As they crossed Dorothy's garden, Caroline observed the neighboring houses. Something had changed, though she couldn't pinpoint what. The same modest facades, the same clotheslines with laundry fluttering in the breeze, but there was a different air, an economic tranquility that she didn't remember from her childhood. In Dorothy's kitchen, amid sweet bread and shared memories, the idea emerged that would change everything. "I'm thinking of writing a book about how rural life has changed in recent decades," Caroline commented. "You know, I was always a national politics journalist, but I never wrote about my roots." Dorothy seemed to tense slightly. "It's a good idea, but you know how we are here, private about our affairs." That night, Caroline couldn't sleep. From her window, she observed the dim lights of the scattered farms. She remembered families struggling during the crisis of the 80s, lost harvests, loans impossible to repay. However, now everyone seemed stable, even comfortable. The next day, she decided to visit her former teacher, Mrs. Meredith Wallace, who had always been the living memory of the town. She found her in her small house filled with books, as lucid as ever at 90 years old. "Caroline, my child, I knew you would return someday," said the elderly woman, adjusting her glasses. "You've come to ask questions, not just to say hello. I see it in your eyes." Caroline smiled, surprised by her teacher's insight. "That's true, I'm intrigued by the town. Everyone seems to be doing well financially, but they continue living with the same simplicity as always." Meredith was silent for a moment. "Have you heard of the Circle of Seven Oaks?" she finally asked in a low voice. "The what?" responded Caroline, intrigued. "It's not something that's openly discussed," continued Meredith, "but you're from here, and besides—" The elderly woman stopped, as if she had been about to reveal something important. "You should talk to Hope Montgomery. She always had a special fondness for you." The visit to Whisper Creek Farm was revealing, though not in the way Caroline expected. Hope received her with open arms and a feast of fried chicken and cornbread. They talked about old times, about Frank, about life in the city. But when Caroline mentioned her book, she noticed how Hope's gaze became cautious. "You know who might help you?" "Ray Hudson, the retired accountant. He has a good memory for numbers and changes in the region." As she left the farm, a young man named Michael offered to drive her in his pickup truck to Ray's house. He was Hope's grandson, recently returned from college where he was studying business. "My grandmother always talks about you," he commented as he drove along the dirt roads. "She says you were the one who inspired her to look beyond the mountains." Caroline was surprised. She didn't remember having such an influence on Hope. The old accountant Ray Hudson lived in a simple house on the outskirts of town. He greeted them with initial suspicion that transformed into hospitality when he recognized Caroline. "Rosemary's daughter. Of course I remember you. Your mother was an exceptional woman." After Michael left, Ray seemed to relax. Between cups of coffee, he began to talk about the old days, about how the agricultural cooperative had changed the region. People think prosperity comes suddenly, but it doesn't. It comes from decisions made decades ago, from sacrifices that no one sees. When Caroline asked directly about the apparent economic well-being hidden beneath the simplicity, Ray looked at her intently. "There are things we don't discuss with just anyone, Caroline. But you..." He hesitated for a moment and then stood up to fetch something. He returned with a worn notebook. "Your mother would have wanted you to know. This will give you some clues, but promise me you'll be discreet." Upon opening the notebook, Caroline found lists of names, figures, and cryptic notations. Among them, she recognized surnames of families from the town, including her own mother's. What caught her attention most was a recurring symbol, 7, intertwined lines forming what appeared to be a stylized oak tree. "What is the circle of 7 oaks?" she asked directly. Ray sighed deeply. "It's not what but who, and I think it's time for you to discover for yourself." The dawn light found Caroline bent over Ray's notebook, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. The notations revealed a fascinating pattern. 7 families from Golden Creek had formed a secret economic alliance in 1985, right after the devastating crisis that had hit rural America. Among the names, she discovered with amazement her mother's, Rosemary Vaughn. "Mom was part of this," she whispered to herself, remembering the modest life they had always led. A particular notation caught her attention. Educational Fund CV, State University, $50,000. CV, Caroline Vaughn. Her own college education, which she had always believed was financed by a mysterious rural scholarship, had apparently been paid for by this secret circle. The sound of a vehicle approaching interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she saw Michael's pickup truck parking in front of her house. "Good morning, Caroline," greeted the young man with an honest smile. "My grandmother asked me to invite you to a special breakfast at Whisper Creek. She says there are people who want to meet you." The breakfast turned out to be much more than a simple social gathering. In the backyard of the farm, under a trellis of bougainvillea, 6 women of various ages were waiting, all with an air of serene dignity that Caroline immediately recognized as quiet power. "Welcome, child," said Hope, guiding her to the table. "Let me introduce you to the Circle of 7 Oaks, or what remains of it." One by one, Hope introduced the women. Dorothy Sanders, who besides being her neighbor, owned 3 bakery chains in the capital. Isabel Martin, whose modest herbal remedy shop financed a biotechnology laboratory in Chicago. Margaret Owens, who under the appearance of a simple chicken farmer, controlled a poultry export network to Central America. Lucy Quinn, the silent embroiderer who had patented an irrigation system used in 3 countries, and Teresa Jenkins, who with her wrinkled face and calloused hands hid her majority stake in a technology company valued in the millions. "The 7th oak was your mother," explained Hope with a soft voice. "Since her passing, we've kept her place empty, waiting." Caroline felt overwhelmed. "Waiting for what?" she managed to ask, as hot chocolate and sweet bread were being served. "For you," replied Teresa naturally. Rosemary always said her daughter would return when it was time to continue the story. During the following hours, the women shared the true history of Golden Creek. How, after years of being ignored by banks and abandoned by government policies, 7 women had decided to take control of their economic destiny. "We started small," explained Isabel. "Each of us contributed what little we had. Savings, family jewelry, inherited parcels of land. We put everything into a common fund." "The revolutionary aspect wasn't the money," continued Lucy. "It was the strategy. We decided that half of our profits would always be reinvested, that we would never spend on ostentation, and that we would diversify beyond agriculture." As the conversation progressed, Caroline better understood the genius of the plan. These women had identified investment opportunities that no one else saw, had sent their children to study business and technology when no one in town was thinking about higher education, and had bought minority stakes in emerging companies when they were still accessible. "Why keep it a secret?" Caroline finally asked. "Why continue living as if you were simple farmers when you could enjoy your wealth?" The women exchanged knowing looks before Hope answered. "Secrecy protected us. From envy, from opportunists, even from our own weaknesses. Besides," she added with a mischievous smile, "who would suspect that an old woman in an apron controls international companies?" After breakfast, Hope led Caroline to a room that remained locked. Upon opening it, she revealed a surprisingly modern space. Computers, screens with financial graphs, and a world map with small blinking lights. "Our operations center," she explained with pride. "From here, we monitor every investment, every market movement. The young people help us with technology, but the decisions remain ours." In a corner, Caroline noticed a framed photograph. The 7 original women of the circle, much younger, including her mother, all with determined expressions under an enormous oak tree. "We took it the day we signed our pact," said Hope. "We swore that our families would never again suffer hunger or humiliation." Upon leaving the farm, Caroline walked without a fixed destination, trying to assimilate everything she had discovered. Her mother, whom she had always seen as a simple housewife, had been a financial strategist, a visionary. How many other stories like this remained hidden in American towns? Her journalistic instinct was strongly activated. This was the story of her life, the book she was destined to write. But then she remembered Hope's words. Secrecy protected us. Revealing the truth could destroy what these women had carefully built over decades. Her dilemma was interrupted by the arrival of a man in his 50s, dressed simply but with an undeniable air of authority. "Caroline Vaughan, I presume," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Edward Ross, Teresa's son. They told me you would be here." Edward invited her to walk to a nearby coffee plantation. As they moved among the plants laden with red berries, he spoke frankly. "The mothers told us you're writing a book. We want to know your intentions." Caroline noticed it wasn't a question, but an assessment. "Honestly, I'm confused," she admitted. "As a journalist, I feel the responsibility to tell this extraordinary story. As Rosemary's daughter, I feel I must protect her legacy." Edward nodded thoughtfully. "Did you know there's now a new generation of the Circle? We, the children and grandchildren, are expanding what they started, but with new technologies, cryptocurrencies, renewable energies." His words raised more questions for Caroline. "Does everyone in town take part in this?" she asked, remembering the apparent widespread prosperity. "Not everyone, but many have benefited indirectly," explained Edward. "The Circle created a community education fund, financed improvements to the health center, modernized irrigation systems. The philosophy has always been, we all grow or no one grows." At sunset, Caroline received an unexpected invitation. Michael appeared again at her door, this time with a formal message. "The Circle of Seven Oaks requests your presence tonight at the old cooperative. There's something they must show you." The old agricultural cooperative of Golden Creek and IE, adobe and tile building that most in town considered abandoned, shone that night with a warm light that escaped through the cracks of its closed windows. Caroline arrived punctually, her heart beating with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Michael was waiting for her at the entrance, elegant in his freshly ironed white shirt. "Welcome to the annual meeting of the Circle," he said, offering her his arm. "It's the first time an outsider has been invited since its founding." Upon entering, Caroline was paralyzed by the transformation of the space. The rustic interior had been adapted with cutting-edge technology, touch screens, projection systems, and a huge circular table where more than 20 people of different ages were already waiting. She recognized the women from breakfast, but now they were accompanied by their children, grandchildren, and some unfamiliar faces. "Sit in Rosemary's place," indicated Hope, pointing to an empty chair marked with a silver plaque that bore her mother's engraved name. "Today we will decide together the future of our story." The meeting began with a ritual that, as they explained, was repeated each year. Each family presented their successes and failures, without embellishments or excuses. Dorothy Sanders reported on the expansion of her bakeries to 3 new states. Isabel Martin presented the advances of a pharmaceutical patent based on traditional medicinal plants. Teresa Jenkins, the eldest of the group, proudly showed how her investment in solar energy had doubled its yield in just 1 year. "Now," said Hope when everyone had finished, "comes the most important moment, the vote for the new community project." Each year, they explained to Caroline, the Circle chose an initiative that would benefit the entire town, financed with a fixed percentage of their collective earnings. This year, there were 3 proposals: a cultural center with a library specialized in agriculture, a scholarship program for studies abroad, or a support fund for women entrepreneurs in the region. To Caroline's surprise, they offered her a vote. "But I don't formally belong to the Circle," she protested. "You occupy Rosemary's chair," Teresa replied firmly. "The vote is yours by right." As she listened to the passionate arguments in favor of each project, Caroline began to understand the true dimension of what these families had built. It wasn't just a network of investments, but a parallel system of community development, based on principles that combined traditional rural solidarity with a sophisticated business vision. When it came her turn to vote, she did so with the certainty of honoring her mother's legacy. After the vote, which favored the fund for women entrepreneurs, Michael stood up to present what he called the new generation's proposal. With the confidence of someone who has studied at the best universities, but keeps his feet on his native soil, he explained his vision: to create a digital platform that would directly connect rural producers across America with international markets, eliminating intermediaries and using blockchain technology to guarantee fair transactions. "We want to expand the Circle's model," he concluded, looking into the eyes of each person present. "Not just for our benefit, but for all communities that, like ours, have talent and work ethic, but lack opportunities." The silence that followed was broken by hope. "This proposal requires more than our money. It requires making our story public, at least partially. And that brings us to you, Caroline," she said, turning toward her. "Your book could be the bridge between our secret past and our open future." The tension in the room was palpable. Decades of discretion were not easily abandoned. "I won't write anything without your approval," Caroline assured them. "But I believe your story deserves to be told, not as a shameful secret, but as a model of resistance and vision." After hours of passionate debate, where deep fears and bold hopes came to light, the Circle reached a historic decision. They would support Michael's project and allow Caroline to write her book with certain conditions. The story would be told as a narrative of collective empowerment, not as the saga of a few privileged families. Certain financial and strategic details would be protected, and most importantly, the proceeds from the book would be entirely allocated to expanding the fund for women entrepreneurs. The meeting concluded at dawn. As the participants said their goodbyes, Edward approached Caroline with a carved wooden box. "This is for you," he said, solemnly handing it to her. "They belonged to your mother." Inside, Caroline found letters written by Rosemary over the years, addressed to her but never sent. In them, her mother explained the reasons for her participation in the Circle, her hopes for her daughter's future, and a final wish. "When you return to our town, I hope you understand that true wealth is not in what we accumulate, but in what we build together." The following months transformed Caroline's life. Settled again in the family home, she divided her time between writing her book and learning the ins and outs of how the Circle functioned. Gradually, she assumed the place her mother had left vacant, contributing her journalistic experience and her contacts in the publishing world to support the new phase of expansion. The day she finished the manuscript, she organized a private reading for the original members of the Circle. Under the same trellis where she had discovered the truth, Hope, Dorothy, Isabel, Margaret, Lucy, and Teresa listened with tears in their eyes as Caroline had transformed their secret history into a powerful narrative about rural dignity and collective intelligence. "I titled it The Seven Oaks," she announced, showing the cover where the photograph of the founders appeared. Subtitle: how a group of women reinvented the future without abandoning their roots. The publication of the book coincided with the launch of Michael's digital platform, which they called Strong Roots. The impact was immediate and surprising. National and international journalists began to visit Golden Creek, fascinated by this rural community that had created an alternative economic model. Television producers proposed documentaries, and universities requested case studies. The Circle, accustomed to anonymity, had to learn to navigate this new visibility. Some members adapted better than others, but all recognized that it was a necessary change for the next phase of their vision. One afternoon, as Caroline was watering the small garden she had begun to cultivate next to her house, she received a visit from Hope. The matriarch, now using a cane but with the same energy in her gaze, brought news. "The governor wants to meet with us. He says our model could be replicated in other communities across the state." Caroline smiled. Who would have imagined, from secret pact to public policy? Hope took a seat on a stone bench, contemplating the sunset over the fields. That had been her entire life. "Your mother would be proud, not just of the book, but of your decision to stay, to continue what we started." Caroline nodded, feeling an emotion she couldn't name. "Do you know what's the most valuable thing I learned from this whole story?" she asked, sitting beside the elderly woman. "That true revolution doesn't always arrive with flags and speeches. Sometimes it comes quietly, in meetings of women who refuse to accept the limits others impose on them." As the sun set behind the mountains of Kentucky, Caroline Vaughan understood that she had finally found the story she was destined to tell, and more importantly, the story she was destined to live. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of the Circle of Seven Oaks has shown you the power of unity and shared vision. To continue this journey of stories that reveal the hidden strength of our communities, we've prepared a special series about revolutionary women of America. Find it here by clicking to your left. If you were moved by the story of Caroline and the incredible women of Golden Creek, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Each day we bring new stories that celebrate silent resistance and the ingenuity of our people. Tell us in the comments, do you know similar stories in your own communities? We're waiting for you to continue weaving together these narratives that deserve to be told.